Well, hey there. My name is Mike Nelson, and I host this podcast, The Mobility Nerd Herd. And it's coming to you live from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, and also known as the Highway Loss Data Institute. And I'm here with my good friend, Matt Moore, who leads HLDI. And they've been nice enough to host my home game at an away location inside the Institute. And Matt's been a long-time leader in this space of auto safety, predominantly with the insurance industry, but works closely with the automotive industry, as we'll see in a few minutes. And Matt is a fantastic host, if you will, and a great guy to do this with. So Matt, we're going to be talking about a few things today, but mostly it's going to focus on a study that HLDI did relating to Mazdas and its suite of ADAS level technology, right?
That's correct. We've been at HLDI, we've been studying advanced driver assistance systems for almost 20 years, largely in partnership with auto manufacturers. And Mazda has been a very capable, very engaged partner over the years. In fact, some of the first studies that we did on ADAS were done in partnership with Mazda, and we were thrilled to get them to cooperate on this study, and we think there are some fantastic findings to help inform the insurance industry, the safety community, and also vehicle consumers.
And for many of us that have been watching this space for a long time, what we assumed was going to happen was some of this technology was going to start to make a difference in safety and how cars performed and avoided accidents or maybe behaved during accidents. And what we've found, or what the study found in black and white and very broad strokes, is that when you bundle the technology, you start to layer on all the different components and now automated, it actually becomes a very, almost a very laminated approach to using technology to achieve a much safer driving environment. But Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about this study?
Sure. So as I mentioned, Mazda was a fantastic partner. They provided us with some a significant volume of data related to their vehicles, model years 2015 through 2023, data on all the technologies that could be fitted to their vehicles. So we took that data, we fused it with our insurance data, which our insurance data represents about 85% of all the vehicles insured for personal use in the US. Our data set includes some limited information on what the insurance industry would call rated driver factors, the person who is sort of assigned to the vehicle for insurance purposes. So we controlled for demographic variables like age and marital status, where the vehicle, where the insurance bill is sent, what the insurance industry calls the garaging location, and also things like the deductibles. So we fused the two data sets, controlled for everything I just described in order to produce estimates of the changes in the key insurance metrics related to each of these technologies.
Well, let me hit the audience with one big point here, and this is really something that every insurance company should be going home and saying, we have to pay more attention to this. And this is a 39% improvement in safety, if you will, when you layer these technologies. And 39%, really, you're almost at half, or half the accidents are not happening. And we're not even talking about lessening the impact of what happens when an accident does happen. But Matt's going to take us into the numbers. The numbers are absolutely astounding, and I think you're going to be amazed at this. And we're not even taking into account, when you look at this study, of human beings that are using or not using the technology in the car. This is just the attributes of the car are showing these dramatic improvements. Can you imagine what we would do if we could get people to embrace this technology even more?
Yep. Well, let's get into it, Mike. So if we could go on screen with the slide. Now, folks, I'm going to spend a little bit of time orienting you. I realize there's folks in the audience who are not part of the insurance community, and these are sort of highway safety findings from insurance data. So we need to do a little bit of an insurance data 101 before we get into the results. So each bar represents a change in claim frequency for a crash-related coverage type for a bundle of technology. Now let's just talk through the coverage types really quickly. So in almost every state in the US, there is a coverage type called collision. It pays for damage that you do to your own vehicle when you are at fault. So typical collision claim would be you back into something and you damage a quarter panel or a bumper. That's collision coverage. PDL stands for property damage liability. Property damage liability covers damage you do to other vehicles when you're at fault. So if you're driving your car, you rear end somebody, the damage you cause to their vehicle is covered by your property damage liability coverage. Your collision coverage takes care of the damage to your vehicle. The next three coverage types relate to injuries. BIL stands for bodily injury liability, and that coverage exists in states that have retained a typical fault or tort system. So bodily injury liability pays for injuries you cause to others outside of your vehicle. So that same scenario I just talked about, you rear end another vehicle, you injure the occupants of that vehicle, your bodily injury liability pays for the cost of the injuries to those folks. Your med pay coverage covers the cost or contributes towards the treatment of the costs for folks in your own vehicle. PIP stands for PIP, personal injury protection, is a coverage that's in force in states that have a what we call a no-fault system. So in a no-fault state, each person is required to have their own PIP coverage. Regardless of who's at fault, their PIP coverage takes over. So that's the quick 101 on insurance. Now, there's three major outcomes or metrics that we're going to be discussing throughout the presentation. There's claim frequencies, which is a measure of the number of claims that occur relative to the amount of insured vehicle years. Claim severity, that is the dollars associated with settling the claims that have occurred. So it's dollars divided by claims. And then we're going to talk about something called overall losses. And overall losses is claim dollars divided by the insurance exposure. So nobody showed up to hear about that, but maybe for those of you who aren't in the insurance community, you'll understand your insurance bill a little bit better. So let's dive into the results now. So starting from left and moving to right, each set of bars represents a bundle of technologies. And as we move left to right, the amount of ADAS functionality is building. And so starting on the far left, we have the bundle of front automatic emergency braking, in addition to forward collision warning. And Mike, you dropped the big number, that 39 number, which is the reduction associated with property damage liability, and that's the orange bar on the far right there. When we start on the far left, the A package, we're looking at a frequency reduction in property damage liability of about 15%. And then as we move left to right, as you can see from this visualization, those benefits build and build until we get to the far right with the fully loaded vehicle, where we see we have that property damage liability frequency reduction of about 39%. The only sort of super technical statistical thing I will say is you'll notice each of these colored bars has an I bar on it. The I bar is the 95th percentile confidence interval. So if that I bar overlaps the zero line, we would say that that result is not statistically significant. There's not enough data there for the result to be conclusive.
And the biggest numbers there, again, are to the right of the screen.
Yep.
And that orange bar is obviously statistically significant according to that I bar, right?
That is statistically significant, correct.
Wow, it is really, as you'll hear, it's going to be statistically significant to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a really big number. As you mentioned earlier, there's a lot baked into these results. We don't know whether or not people are actually using the technology. We don't know whether or not the crashes that are being eliminated are specific to the technologies that are causing these frequency reductions. But I think another just amazing takeaway from these results is I would point to the D package. And that's the package where the increment is for pedestrian automatic emergency braking. And injuries to pedestrians would be covered by bodily injury liability. So the bar of interest there is really the red bar, and we can see that the red bar for the D package is associated with a bigger reduction than, say, for example, the A package, which just has a Generation 1 front automatic emergency braking. But what's interesting, encouraging, and or potentially anomalous is the reduction under property damage liability, where we can see we get that big jump there, and for property damage liability for pedestrian AEB, which you might scratch your head and say, how can that be? This system's intended to prevent crashes with pedestrian. But that pedestrian AEB system, in the context of these results, we believe it's a generational marker. It represents the fact that not only have the manufacturers done the work to figure out how to identify and potentially avoid crashes with pedestrians, but along the way they incorporated additional learnings into those technologies. So it's just, in a lot of ways, each of these increments is a generational marker, but I like to point to that D package in contrast to the A package and say we're pretty confident that's a generational shift.
Yeah, so maybe it's worth repeating, maybe it's worth just dumbing down a bit, not for you guys, but so the pedestrian AEB, of course, is also watching out for cars. It's watching out for dogs. It's watching out for other objects that you could hit. And so along the way, while not hitting pedestrians, it didn't hit other things.
Absolutely, and those are massive reductions.
Yeah, that is amazing. And then look at how that number explodes 2 graphs over. But why don't you take us through the whole thing?
Yeah, so I think we're going to 2 graphs over to that F package. What is really interesting is that a lot of insurance collision claims and property damage liability claims, although expensive, we're talking about a lot of dollars in play, but a lot of those claims are relatively inexpensive. And if we think about rear automatic emergency braking, most of us are only going 2 or 3 miles an hour when we're backing up. And so that system is aimed at preventing a lot of claims which are sort of easy to prevent because they're low speed hits, but also those low speed hits, those which generate low dollar claims, represent a disproportionate percentage of all property damage liability and collision claims. So that rear AEB system is A, it works well, and B, it works against a set of crashes or claims that is way overrepresented in this data set.
So that farthest most group of bars includes rear automatic emergency braking.
And everything, and all of the other increments along the way.
2 before that is the pedestrian AEB. That's just astounding. And when you look at that orange bar, that really says almost everything about the real significance of the study, right?
Yeah, so for under collision coverage, we're looking at about an 18% reduction in collision claims and a 39% reduction in property damage liability and 20% in bodily injury liability. Those are all big, big reductions.
And you think about how many dollars that represents worldwide, but even just inside the United States, that's only about what's happening in frequency, how often these accidents happen. We're not talking about severity. And it's showing us that these accidents, in essence, aren't happening, right?
They're not happening. They'll be eliminated. Yep.
Wow. Well, so imagine if there's 40% less accidents, there's 40% less plaintiff attorney work, which I'm not sure I feel about that.
So Mike, so these are the packages that we were able to assess in this study. There were some technologies that were either relatively new or relatively novel in the way they were deployed in Mazda's vehicle fleet, and we were able to get at some unique estimates related to those technologies. So let's just take a look at these really quickly. Blind spot detection with rear cross traffic alert. I love blind spot because it almost anytime I'm on the highway.
You're such a geek.
Yeah, it's always
How many people
helping.
like blind spots?
The detection piece. I don't like blind spots, but the detection piece is awesome. And yeah, anytime I'm on an interstate and I live just off of Interstate 66 and I go to change lanes, it provides me with information that I wouldn't have just sitting in the driver's seat without a lot of head rotation. But on top of that, the rear cross traffic alert piece is fantastic. Anytime you go to back out of a parking spot, if someone is moving perpendicular to you, it gives you a heads up. And so those are not particularly injurious crashes, but there's a lot of them. Curve adaptive headlights. This is an excellent illustration. If you think about if we were actually able to measure, that technology should only confer a benefit on at nighttime on curvy unlit roads. And the fact that under some of those coverage types, we're seeing reductions approaching 10%, it means that they're really providing a lot of assistance during the nighttime driving task if we're seeing those kind of frequency reductions in terms of overall results. Heads-up display, we're not certain exactly what's going on there. My pet hypothesis is that perhaps it's helping folks comply with speed limits. That's one I want to dive more deeply into.
But it's helping.
It's clearly helping, yeah. Or it's collinear with other vehicle factors that we don't know, which is often a possibility, especially with something relatively new, but it's helping. Traffic sign recognition, I would not make anything of those results other than they're not statistically significant, they're on relatively new vehicles. We need more data before we can say anything with confidence about traffic sign recognition.
But if you had to guess, the technology is not mature enough to actually do a great job with some sign recognition.
There are noted limitations for these particular implementations of that technology, but I have to imagine that helping to coach a driver on there's a stop sign approaching. I think that would be safety positive, so we're anxious to see what these results look like once these vehicles mature and or the technology is more deeply deployed in Mazda's fleet.
Well, I told you the story of my trip to New York City to fly here. Yesterday I was in Tesla full self-driving mode, and as I passed a speed limit sign that said 65 and a state police officer sitting right beside the sign, it's in full self-driving, and the car is doing 73 miles an hour. And I thought, why did the car go down? And it turns out, as I did some research, that some of this technology is not recognizing speed limit signs. And so obviously that will start to make a difference too as we start to get better at it.
Years ago we had a demo vehicle. It was a production vehicle, but it had technologies not currently available in the US, and one of the things was traffic sign recognition. And it was tied to the adaptive cruise control system. And I was this was in the summertime, I was on a surface street. I had the cruise control set to the speed limit, and I was rolling along, and all of a sudden it went from 45 to 25. And what had happened was it had driven past, the vehicle had gone past a school zone, and it just dropped anchor on me. And thankfully nobody was tailing me, but so it was able to recognize the sign, but unable to sort of contextualize the fact that it was a school zone, the markers weren't on, and it was the middle of summer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's an important thing to keep your mind on as you're driving around and hoping that the technology does a better job than you, and that's maybe a fool's errand. Matt, it's been 8 years of data in this study, right?
Yep.
But you've looked at this issue or these issues before, so it's not like this is the first time you've ever done this. So maybe take me through a little bit and take us all through a little bit of what you've been doing in this space for years.
So from a HLDI perspective, we've been studying ADAS for 15 or 20 years, depending on how you count and what you're counting. One of the first studies we released was on the Mercedes Distronic system, which was the combination of adaptive cruise control and forward collision warning, which was associated with about a 5% reduction from a claim frequency perspective, and a pretty big increase in collision claim severity, as there was a radar unit mounted vulnerable position. The next study we followed on with was a look at Volvo's city safety system, which at the time that was novel because it was using a laser-based sensor mounted inside the occupant compartment, so it didn't carry with it the same penalties as radar-based systems with the radars mounted in the grille. And then from there, a lot of other manufacturers just volunteered to step up, to share data with us, to help us understand how these features were working. And then So we began accumulating more knowledge about these features, but at the same time, not long after we released the first results that said that front forward collision warning was good and front AEB was even better, my colleagues on the IHS side of the house began developing a test protocol for front AEB and then testing that technology. And then my colleagues sort of on the behavioral side on the IHS began doing parallel studies to the HLDI studies and also deeper dives on issues like advanced lighting systems. And one of the things we learned was a lot of people don't use their high beams. And so automatic high beams were providing functionality because folks weren't using their high beams enough. We also did some studies looking at how frequently these technologies were activated or deactivated. And a key learning from that was that front automatic emergency braking, folks had that turned on about 90% of the time. By contrast, lane departure warning systems were turned off about half the time. We followed that one up a few years later and found that AEB was holding strong, but lane departure warning had actually gained some ground, which I think is something, that is something we need to think about as we're thinking about that first set of results we shared and those generational changes. Some of it could be that the sensors or the algorithms that process the data from the sensors are working better, or there's more sensors, or the manufacturers may have just done some work that drivers like the technology better and are more apt to leave it on or engage it.
And probably all of the above, right?
Or all of the above. Yep.
Yeah, and I think back to a friend of mine about 10 years ago talking about his brand new Toyota, and he said it keeps beeping at me, and I just keep turning it off. He hated that lane departure thing, and I think we've also acclimated to that, and we started to say, you know what, I count on that to tell me you're being a bad driver, you're drifting, pay attention, and especially with what's distracting us in the cockpit now, which is growing more problematic every single day. We need these kind of devices to save us from higher insurance rates. And while we're at it, this concept of focusing on claim frequency while it's claimed is really an actuary or an underwriter impact as opposed to what's going on inside the claim department, right?
So yeah, exactly. So that's a good way to think about it. Frequency is, kind of sort of an actuarial thing, whereas claim severity is something that folks in claims and actuarial tend to focus on. And before we deep dive this slide that we're about to share, we'll just harken back to my comments about the Distronic study and the fact that the very first study showed we had about a $2,000 problem from a collision claim severity perspective. And in here, as we look at this slide and we're looking at severities for each of these technology bundles, consistent with the notion that adding additional ADAS functionality typically requires the addition of sensors. As we move left to right, as we layer in more and more functionality, what we can see is that in general, for collision coverage, the severities do increase. So that's to some extent consistent with the narrative that the ADAS sensors, and I am not saying they're not contributing to the problems that we're facing from the cost of vehicle repair issue and insurability these days, but the fact that we get this sort of mixed puzzle or mixed result for property damage liability severity indicates that there's other things going on, and kind of we'll get to that in a minute.
If I can just stop.
Sure, let me back up.
Actually, let's just keep talking about claim severity. So I think the next one was claim severity as well. Excuse me. I've heard many claims people talking about how claims severity is going up, and it's all this equipment in the cars, and it's the sensors, and it's the electrification of some cars, and obviously all of this technology. Airbags go off. It's not one, it's 20, and so they're understandably responsible for trying to manage severity, not lower it, but manage it. At the same point, these numbers show that technology may be costing more for insurance companies to cover, but that can be dealt with RAID. But from a standpoint of safety, accidents aren't happening.
The frequency results clearly show that we are eliminating a lot of crashes, a lot of claims.
That's an interesting philosophical discussion, right?
Yeah, And I think a very important part to make is part of this national discussion around claim costs, insurance costs, the cost of technology, is that there's a lot of stuff on vehicles which has absolutely, positively nothing to do with safety. But they also require electronics and sensors, and as someone who his job is to pursue the advancement of highway safety, it's frustrating that many of these other things get swept up into the discussion about ADAS. Like, for example, on one of my vehicles, I have blind spot detection with rear cross traffic alert, and the sensors and the indicators are built into the side view mirrors. But those side view mirrors also have they have defrosters built in them, which I love. But if I were to damage one of these mirrors, it's going to cost. And then those mirrors have puddle lights built into them. My wife really likes those, and we're going to have to, every vehicle going forward.
Come on, you like them too.
They're kind of cool. They don't have the logos in them like some other vehicles have. But, not a piece of safety technology. And then the side
except for those stepping in puddles with brand new shoes.
Exactly. Maybe it eliminates some slip and fall injuries. And also turn signal indicators integrated into that side view mirror, which I think look great. I think they improve sort of the conspicuity of the signal. And so, maybe that's a little bit aesthetics and a little bit of safety. But, it's an excellent illustration that the things on a vehicle these days are a mixed bag of safety and comforts and convenience and aesthetics. It's not all the safety tech.
Yeah, we were talking earlier that just even like the electric door opening mechanisms in cars. Now almost everything opens electronically.
Yeah.
That's not a safety feature.
No.
But it's a very expensive proposition.
Yeah, for reasons unclear to me, I still own I have a minivan in my family's fleet of vehicles, and the sliding doors have radar or motion sensors under the rocker panels, and so if you want to open the door, you just walk up and wave your foot, and the door opens. Which it's cool, it's neat, but it's going to cost if it breaks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Well,
should we talk about overall losses?
Yeah.
So folks, just a reminder, if you're not part of the insurance community, overall losses is a look at the total amount of dollars spent on claims relative to the total number of vehicles insured. And that's the metric we're looking at here. In short, overall losses is a metric that combines both claim frequency and claim severity. And what we're seeing here is, let's just talk about property damage liability. It starts good and the story just keeps getting better as we layer in more and more technology. So by the time we get to the loaded vehicles, the F package with everything and rear automatic emergency braking, we're looking at a 38% reduction in overall losses for property damage liability. And then for collision coverage for those first three packages, those results aren't really statistically significant, so it's a push. It's even money. But once we get to the pedestrian AEB as that sort of generational marker, there we're looking at about a 12% reduction, and that holds as we move across through all the packages. So these technologies are delivering big time from a safety perspective.
And as you mentioned earlier, that bar that runs through the middle of those orange bars show that it's statistically significant, so in a big way.
In a big way. Yep, exactly.
And just so nobody's confused, we're not talking about pedestrian losses going down. That's just the pedestrian AEB that has the additional benefit of avoiding accidents, I would hope. So, why don't you continue?
Sure. So there is this persistent issue about the interplay or interaction of the sensors and claim severities. And one of the great things about this study was because we had data on so many vehicles for so much time, we were able to do basically 3 separate measurements of claim frequency for each of these bundles. And what we did was broke the claim size distribution for each of the time periods in the study, and we broke it up into 3 separate bins. So the first bin was kind of very low dollars up to the 50th percentile amount. And then the mid bin was from the 50th to the 90th percentile claim amount, and then everything over the 90th percentile, so really high severity, high dollar crashes. And after we categorized each claim as a low, mid, or high severity claim, we modeled the claim frequencies within each of those bins, just like we did for the measures of frequency, primary measures of frequency for the bundles. And the results are as you see here. And what to me is really fascinating is when you look at the A package, and if we think about that A package as sort of first generation implementations or early implementations, or at least not current implementations of front AEB, we see that there's modest reductions, about 5% or so, in the low bin and the mid bin, but which is still great because there's a heck of a lot of claims in that bin. But then what's happening, if you think about, and this is a study of Mazda, but we've socialized this notion of that Mercedes study. So it eliminated a lot of crashes, but the crashes it didn't eliminate, the cost skyrocketed because there was this $2,000 radar unit in it. And this is sort of what this data is signaling here, is that we're eliminating a lot of some low dollar crashes, some mid dollar crashes, but we're increasing the volume of high dollar crashes with that A package. And those higher dollar crashes are relatively rare, at least in the full context of the full body of claims data. And the pattern holds a bit, and there's some wiggle in those first three packages, but then once we get to pedestrian AEB, we get these much deeper reductions in the first two bins. And that mid bin, that's a reduction of 22%. And then for the first time, we get a reduction in the high bin, or at least, given the size of those confidence intervals, I would say that, that's just, it's a push, it's a zero finding. But that zero finding persists across the data set. So it's saying we hit a point in terms of the packaging of the technology or the generations of the technology where we really eliminate that severity penalty. And we see this same pattern of results, just more pronounced and more clean when we look at property damage liability. So big takeaway here, I think, is if I had to soundbite this, the biggest benefits are coming from eliminating the lower dollar claims. But over time, as the technologies are evolving, we are seeing deeper benefits in the lower bins and beginning to see benefits for those higher severity crashes.
I want to clarify something for the audience. Matt's used the term ADAS, and I think almost everybody on the other side of this lens knows ADAS is also called level 2, but it's assisted driving. The public will confuse all of that kind of technology as autonomous, and we're not talking about that. We're talking about these features that are assisting drivers. What's interesting about these right three is you're adding the driver attention alert in the second to the last one. Mm-hmm. And some people would call that a driver management system. And some of that is your hands on the wheel, get your hands back on the wheel, or your gaze is not down the road, it's down at your phone, out the window, but it's those kinds of things. And so we're even seeing the driver attention part of this starting to pay off, right?
Yeah, and that's a good thing. Is I think some of our more vexing highway safety and insurance problems are related to driver misbehavior. And being able to remind the driver that there's a need for them to pay attention, to keep their eyes on the road. And that includes whether any of these systems are engaged, whether you might be driving with some type of either adaptive cruise control or a partial driving automation system that provides a higher level of support. Regardless of what technology you have in the vehicle, eyes on the road, straight ahead, hands on the wheel, it's safety positive.
Well, fantastic. And the ADAS part of this is something that's been very controversial because the car is doing most of these functions without the human being doing much. We're going to see, as time goes on, more of that technology in these cars, so the human being does less. And some of the studies on that the driver doing less will increase inattentiveness, and that's a risk in and of itself. But it seems like based on these numbers, the driver management system is paying some benefits, but also the ADAS features are paying as a group much more. And you made a point too, and I want to make sure you said it. I didn't ask you before about this, but it's been great. Mazda's been very cooperative, and obviously what they're doing is working. But you could socialize this across all ADAS systems to some greater extent or lesser extent, right?
So I would say these results are very consistent with results that we've done either A, in partnership with other manufacturers, or B, work that we've done with our own data assets. What was novel about the Mazda study was that the volume of data they provided us and the more recent vehicles and yeah, but the results do generalize. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so a few in the audience, next month's podcast, I will be hosting Jen Morrison from Mazda, who Matt knows well, and I'm going to ask you for a couple of these slides to show Jen and go over it, but it's...
I think you'll find she's very familiar with them, but yeah, Jennifer was a critical partner in terms of helping bring this study across the finish line.
I'll tell you a funny story. We sent an invite to a whole bunch of people and says, join me tomorrow, as if I was inviting her. And she wrote back and she said, Mike, I'm not talking tomorrow, I'm talking next month. I said, yes, I wasn't inviting you. That's our, call it spam if you want. But Jennifer, for some reason you ran to a computer today. Stand down till next month. But great job for Mazda. Great job, Jen. So let's talk about the rear AEB as the strongest individual performer. Now, it's not really that AEB on its own, but it's when it's layered into all this other stuff. But what does that say about AEB, rear AEB, delivering such a disproportionate return?
And one of the slides we didn't include was the claim size distribution for collision and property damage liability by dollar amount. And both those distributions are shaped like that. And there is a whole bunch of collision and property damage liability claims that are relatively low dollar claims. Most of us drive relatively slowly when we're backing up. I don't know that I've ever gone...
Still can't see.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know that I've ever gone faster than 3 miles an hour while in reverse. And so the challenge of firing the brakes at such low speeds, it's not a huge challenge. And the vehicle's got a fair amount of time to make decisions. And so it's incredibly effective, and it's effective against a population of claims that is overrepresented in the data. So I think what we're seeing here is two things simultaneously. Number one, it's very effective, but number two, it's effective against a population of claims that's way overrepresented in insurance data. And I'd love to get an answer to the question of sort of why manufacturers deployed rear AEB later than front AEB, because the ramifications of a false positive, a false activation for when you're traveling forward, say on a highway, far more risky than a false activation backing up at 2 or 3 miles per hour. But
so in relative terms, compared to the other technologies in this car, rear automatic emergency braking is in its relative infancy.
yes.
And you can see what it does to the equation. And I think about half of the accidents I've had, many. A lot of them have been backing up in parking lots. But it's worth pointing out how far this technology has also come in many other ways. So I drove to New York. I had to go into one of those cavernous parking garages in complete darkness. I have the car in full self-drive, and this is not a pump for Tesla. But I wanted to see what was going to happen. And it drove into the garage by itself. It did 3 turns on that screw that goes higher and higher while you're looking for the parking space. I missed what the car spotted, and there was a tiny little parking space. The car stopped, put its directional on, and then backed into something that I thought, I could never do that. And so it's using automatic emergency braking, but it's also using the parking assist feature, which I think is a little bit crazy at times. Like, would you really let this car park itself? But it worked, and it shows you how much this technology as a whole is going to keep improving the safety case. So, the study shows claim frequency going down and claim severity going up, and insurance carriers are seeing fewer crashes but more expensive ones. How should the industry be thinking about that trade-off when they're pricing this risk with ADAS-equipped vehicles?
Yeah, so I think if we just go back to the overall losses for, yep, here we go. So I think what the data is saying is when you net out those frequency and severity, when you net frequency against severity, the frequency changes are winning in almost every one of these scenarios. So just with collision coverage for the first 3 bundles, it's even money that there's not a benefit there from an overall losses perspective, but for property damage liability, every single bundle's delivering big results. And then for collision coverage, in the last 3 bundles, we are seeing a benefit there. And we chatted about this a little bit when we were talking about the mirrors on my vehicle, but there's also a whole bunch of other things on vehicles these days. Like I mentioned, the radar units or the foot kick, the foot door activator thing. But vehicles have gotten significantly heavier. Lots of vehicles now have all-wheel drive drivetrains, which adds weight, it adds complexity. Lots of vehicles are now turbocharged, supercharged, hybrid vehicles. That adds weight and complexity. EVs are a paradigm shift in terms of how they're built and also in terms of weight and acceleration and other things. So absolutely, ADAS repair has contributed to the pressures that we've seen in terms of vehicle insurability, but there's a lot of other things going on as well. And as we can see illustrated, at least on the slide that we just had up, from an overall losses perspective, by and large, the technology is really delivering.
This study showed no significant recognition of a benefit with traffic sign awareness.
Yep.
We both talked about how these cars are not picking up really the benefits of signs that we expect drivers to pay attention to. So there's a lot of work to be done there, but do you have any sense of how much better these numbers would be if we could start to weave in all the different dynamics of the driving environment?
I don't know the answer to that. What I will comment on is it's always fascinating to me when I have the opportunity to sit down with the engineers that have designed the systems and to talk about how they function. And I remember talking with some engineers, not from Mazda, but another manufacturer, about Gen 1 front AEB system versus Gen 2, and it was a camera-based system. And they had transitioned from black and white cameras to color cameras, and we were talking, and in addition to the switch to color, they also were using broader range cameras and higher fidelity and other things. But one of the things they had shared with me was the color cameras gave them the ability to read the brake lights of leading vehicles and use that as an input for the AEB algorithms. And I think those two things are an excellent illustration of the extent to which these generational changes are improving the functionality of the technology, improving their ability to make sense of the driving environment, incorporate more factors, and deliver bigger benefits.
And the heading there is worth noting. This is data from the insurance industry coming in the years 2015 to 2023. So we really don't have data from what's out there on the road for the last couple of years. And so presumably you're going to keep moving on with this study.
So that is certainly the hope, and there's a couple dilemmas with looking at the latest vehicles. So older vehicles, each vehicle year, so one vehicle insured for 1 year is a unit of observation in the study. So a 10-year-old vehicle gives us 10 units of observation, and when you multiply that by tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of vehicles, you end up with a stack of data. Whereas the more recent vehicles, like in the most current model year, the vehicle may only be insured for 2 or 3 months. And the more recent vehicles have the most recent, most advanced technologies. So it's a constant cat and mouse game in terms of trying to interpret older vehicle results for slightly older vehicles and infer how more recent technologies are performing. And I think that's a big part of why the traffic sign recognition results, are inconclusive and have those big confidence bounds, is they're on relatively new vehicles and they're not yet on a lot of vehicles.
So we've been sitting here with your colleague waiting to see if any questions came in. You haven't introduced her. We were supposed to do that at the beginning.
Sorry,
but,
Lori. Sorry, Lori. So folks, off camera, HLDI's Vice President for Research, Lori Halenga, is standing by to facilitate Q&A.
Yep, I've been chatting with some folks behind the scenes as we all have been talking. So we do have actually several questions here that you all might be able to answer. And so a few of them have to do with when a consumer goes to a dealership. So the first question is, when a consumer does go and they're looking at that sticker on a vehicle, can they be sure that these technologies that they're going to purchase are listed on that sticker? So what is installed in that vehicle they're looking at? Is that available to them on that sticker?
Can I jump in here?
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure, it's your webinar, Mike.
So, yeah, thanks. So Matt talked about Mercedes-Benz earlier, and
Distronic.
their program was actually to get the full suite. You had to look at the sticker for what was called Distronics Plus 4, and without any explanation. And I remember going to a Mercedes dealership and saying, "Well, what's this got?" And he told me, and I said, "Well, where is it?" He goes, "Distronics Plus 4." Like, that's great merchandising. Who the heck knows what Distronics Plus 4 is? This system in Mazda collectively has a word that begins with I. It's like i-Activsense or something like that. So, and then of course there's branding. So every car manufacturer is making new names for this stuff as we go along. And that's some of the debate as to whether or not we should standardize this as so consumers can become more aware of what they're buying and what they're using in the marketplace. But I think I answered the question. You just don't know, and it takes an incredible amount of studying and ask and chat and asking the salesperson, and then a lot of trial and error to drive some of these cars effectively.
And sort of building on that, we've got another question about when consumers go and buy these vehicles, we're seeing huge benefits for ADAS, and that's great for the manufacturers and for the consumers. But how about letting, is there training available for folks when they go buy their vehicle? So a dealer who can walk them through all these features and they know how they work. Do we know if that's happening at dealerships right now?
Well, so anticipating that I'd be talking about Mazda, and I went and drove a Mazda's most advanced vehicle at a dealership a week ago. And I walked up to Adam, last name unknown, and I wouldn't reveal it anyway. And I said, "Here, I'm here to drive this kind of car." And he said, "Sure," pulled it up, and he said, "You can take it off," and I take off with it if you want. I said, no, I want you in the seat. I want you to tell me how to use it. And he did. And then Mazda, to its credit, has not pushed this technology out as far as, say, Tesla. And in my opinion, Tesla's been too far out there with the advancement of this stuff before it's really been proven as safe as it should. That's my opinion. Now, the most important thing here, though, is as I'm going through this and I'm seeing a vehicle that's nowhere near as technologically savvy as a Tesla, and I start describing what the Tesla does, he says, "I'd love to ride in one someday. I've never ridden in one." And so I said, "Well, I'll drive you around." And he had no idea that this is the kind of car that's on the road and is competing with Mazda right now. So do people get trained at dealerships? My experience is no, not enough anyway. And what's the answer to that riddle? I don't think people want to start getting ADAS licensing. I don't know about you, but I can't imagine that's going to go over very big. You're not allowed to drive this car until you pass certification. especially when this technology is updating on over-the-air updates virtually twice, 3 times a month. And the features are changing overnight. So I think that's a really tall order for society to deal with. Who's going to be driving these cars and how they're going to operate it safely?
All right, we've got one more question from our audience that I'll address to you all. So auto sales have slowed a bit and manufacturers are facing tariffs. Are we seeing any changes in the introduction of ADAS as the sales have gone down? Any change in that? Are we still seeing the adoption of this ADAS still increasing over time?
My view on this, absolutely. We are still seeing this technology out there. Some because this has been in the works in the United States. It takes about 4.5 years to bring a car to market. So the stuff that's been in models now have been baked in, and some of this technology is in previous years. So some of this technology is 7, 8 years old. But the important thing to keep in mind is who's competing with who. So I like to frame the conversation this way. Tesla is ahead of, if you consider it doing more tricks, Tesla's ahead of all the other US car manufacturers by a large spacing. But Tesla's not chasing the US manufacturers, they're chasing the Chinese manufacturers who have equally sophisticated technology being produced at a much cheaper price. And the Chinese manufacturers are turning their models over in 2.5 years. So what they're doing now was invented only 2 years ago. And so while we may not see Chinese cars here in the US, they're becoming very prevalent in places like the United Kingdom, and now Canada's bringing in 5 models. So Tesla's competing with China on a world stage. So they have to keep pushing their technology out. On top of that, as this technology blossoms, these manufacturers are getting a lot of data from the driving experience to use it to build large language models on how to make these cars run better. So nobody can stop. Everybody has to keep going. So it is a race to figure out how to get ahead of this technological curve. I want to leave a little bit of time to talk about the IIHS 30 by 30 vision. And so this is a really important initiative.
So about a year ago, we launched a new strategic plan, and the strategic plan was aimed at kind of reversing the course. And the course that I'm talking about is we've seen a 30% increase in fatalities from 2014 to 2022. I think many folks are familiar with the notion of Vision Zero, which is this notion that we will have no fatalities. But that notion just didn't, for us, have enough gravitational pull. And so rather than sort of aiming for the goal line, let's just get a first down here. Yeah. And so the notion was that we would like to see a 30% reduction in fatalities by 2030. Ultimately, we want to get to zero. But let's set an achievable interim goal that can be a call to action. And we're making progress. It's generating a lot of enthusiasm. Others are signing on to it, both from there are states that are signing on to this. There's some manufacturers that have really bought into it, and it has 3 key pillars, and one of them is reducing risky driving behavior. And I think as we'll have to talk again later about driver monitoring and the way driver monitoring may play into solving some risky driving behavior problems. Also, we want to, the notion of extending safety to everyone, making certain that vehicles are providing the same level of driver assistance and crashworthiness for everybody, regardless of size or gender, and that's the focus there. And then finally, the third pillar is accelerating commercial vehicle safety. The landscape of commercial, what constitutes commercial, has really changed in the last 5 years or so. I think most of us have delivery vans that pull up in our neighborhood very often. And so we're focusing on those vehicles. We're also thinking about vehicles that are being used for ride sharing and things like that. But it's a holistic approach with some short-term goals in order to produce call to action that's going to get us some results. So
With the trend line looking like we're going to hit 30 by 30?
the
It's
curve,
not your goal.
progress has been made. The most recent fatality data say that
Yeah.
progress is being made. Some of that was inertia. Some of that we were banking on some of these technologies and their propagation, doing like pedestrian detection. A huge portion of why we've seen this explosion in fatalities has been pedestrian fatalities. And we believe that the propagation of some of the technologies we were talking about today were going to have a positive effect.
So one of the things that happens after every one of these podcasts is I get lots of LinkedIns and emails saying, you didn't ask my question, you didn't answer my question, what about this? And so I unfortunately, I can't take everybody's question, and we can't take everybody's question. And some of those questions are just peculiar to you, peculiar, strange. But for the first 5 people that sign up, I'm willing to give you a half an hour discussion completely free. Just scan the QR code and schedule some time to talk with Mike. And I'd be happy to share with you my views on some of this. And if there's anything that's more appropriately directed at IIHS and HLDI, I'd be happy to direct those questions over to Matt and his colleagues, who are always looking for an opportunity to talk about the work they're doing. But this event wouldn't be thorough enough if I didn't explain what we're also doing at Nelson Law. We've started the Institute for Mobility Education, and this is a different QR code. And what we found, and I'll just share this one story and then we'll call it a day. Last week I was speaking to 300 insurance industry professionals, and I said, how many people here, now they were answering questions when I'm asking them, how many people here have heard the term ADAS or ADAS? And not a hand in the room went up. I said, how about level 2? Has anybody ever heard the term level 2? And we're so close to this, we think, well, everybody uses that. I can tell you, Joe the barber is probably not using level 2. So the Institute for Mobility Education is a forum where we will train people on how to understand what data is in a car. We're not talking about black box data. We're talking about the data that's streaming through the car and that car manufacturers are using to understand how an accident happened. And with that, because with automation, you really can't see what happened in an accident. You can see a crash, but you can't understand what was going on inside the car's mind, inside the human being's mind, how they are interacting together. So police officers and insurance adjusters and plaintiff and defense lawyers and regulators need to have a very granular understanding of how to understand what data is there, and because it's changing all the time, how to look at it and how to get it. So we started the Institute for Mobility Education and encourage anybody who wants to get a deeper thought on this to sign up. Or if that's one of the questions you want to ask me, I'm happy to talk about what this program's about. With that, I want to thank our friends here at IIHS-HLDI. There's no easy way to say IIHS and then flow into HLDI. It's like NHTSA and NTSB. You have to spell one out, not the other. But thank you very much for your time. Love doing this.
It was a blast, Mike. Thanks much.
As always, it's a pleasure to be here. We got to see a crash test earlier. An Audi got smashed into smithereens, all for the good of the public. And thank you very much for the thoughtful preparation and attention by your staff. Thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure, Mike. Take care.